Hello and welcome to the session on Effective Planning, Lesson Planning 101. My name is Roberta Robinson and I am going to be your instructor for this webinar. So by the end of this webinar, you should be able to describe the parts of a lesson plan, create purposeful and effective lesson plans, and plan engaging activities that are developmentally appropriate and enjoyable for your children. So first let's talk about, well, what is a lesson plan, right? So if you are in the early childhood field, if you're teaching children, most often you'll have to create some sort of lesson plan. So your lesson plan is basically your roadmap of what children will do to help them to achieve those standards, those early learning standards. So it's a set of activities that you'll do with your children. Now, in the early childhood field, we often have this grid, right, where we put in our activities from Monday to Friday and the subjects or the times of the day that we meet and the activities of what children will be doing during those times, right? So even though we have this grid and we have all this information that we have to put on this grid, there's a lot of thinking that should go behind creating activities for our children. We want to be careful of doing things just for the sake of doing it. We want to make sure that the things that we do are purposeful and intentional. So we're going to go through that through this webinar, all the things that we should be thinking about when creating a lesson plan. Now, these are all of the parts of a lesson plan. It's a lot, right? And we generally may not write everything in there. We may just kind of summarize it in a way, but these are some of the things that we definitely should be thinking about as we create those activities. So today we're going to talk about the standards, objectives, materials, our motivation, procedures, closing assessment, accommodations, and even extensions and connections when creating lesson plans. So you're ready to go? We're going to dissect this lesson plan and what it may look like for you. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the standards. Now, the standards, of course, are those desired outcomes, those learning expectations for children below kindergarten age that were set by the state. So the state said, hey, these are the things that these children should be able to do by the time they leave this program or by the time they turn a certain age. These are the things that they should know or should be able to do. So those are the early learning standards. Now, there's some general domains that these early learning standards will fall into. So what should they be able to do in language and literacy, mathematics development, social and emotional, physical development, scientific thinking, and so forth. If you're not sure what the early learning standards are for you, just do a simple search, early learning standards and you will, in whatever state that you're in, most states have early learning standards. So make sure you find that, save it to your computer, make sure you look it over so you know what children are expected to learn or be able to do by the time that they leave a certain age group. All right, so that's the standard. So you put that in. Most times it's numbers. You'll just put the numbers in the standards code or maybe a short description of what that standard is. Standards is something that I would recommend that teachers are required to put in their lesson plans, just the numbers at least. So that way we know that everything that we're doing is purposeful. So you just list those standard numbers. The second part of the lesson plan is the objective. So now the objective is the goals of what children should be able, the goals or what they should be able to do by the time you are finished this activity. What is the goal for them? What do you want them to be able to do by the time that they're done? And those objectives should be measurable so the children will be able to. Some people use I can statements as if you're, putting it into the words of the children. I can count to 5, right? That's measurable. After we finish this activity, did we meet that goal? Are they able to do that? So you want to make sure that they are measurable. Now, for them to become measurable, this is one great tool to use, Bloom's taxonomy. And so Bloom's taxonomy starts with the lowest level of higher order thinking, which is just remembering certain facts, right? Creating a list, naming, describing. And what we want to do is try to work all the way up to create. So sometimes we're all over this wheel. So you just want to make sure that you're not stuck here and just remembering phrase, right? We're going to name the letters of the alphabet, right? You want to get up to create. We're going to create words that begin with, a certain sound or a certain letter or something of the sort. But this will kind of help you. So if all of your objectives are falling into this remember phase, then we know that we need to spread it out a little bit more, especially as children grow and get better with certain skills. So here's an example. So remember, children can recite, or children will be able to recite the letters of the alphabet. That's the remembering stage, and remember is that level is fine, especially when you're introducing a skill. You are going to be there. But like I said, the point is not to get stuck. Create maybe something like children can formulate a list of words beginning or pictures beginning with that letter sound A. All right. The next thing that you want to make sure that you think about and consider and have on your lesson plan are those materials. Something small but very big, very important, right? So, of course, those materials are all the supplies that you're going to need to complete this lesson or activity. You want to make sure that you are prepared, and you want to prepare ahead of time. So, while you're creating your weekly lesson plan, it's a great time to think about and note what are the materials that you're going to need to make this lesson happen, right? We don't want to waste time looking for things, or you get to your lesson and you find out that all of the glue is dry or all the glue sticks are dry or whatever it is. So you want to make sure that you have your materials ready, available, and accessible. You also want to make sure that your activities, your materials are age appropriate, right? So we don't want to give small children small toys and materials that they may put in their mouth and choke on, or tiny beads that they may put up their nose and get stuck. So you want to make sure that all of your materials are age appropriate. So that preparation part is so important. Next part of the lesson plan is the motivation. How will you get children excited about what they're about to learn or what they're about to explore? What is that hook? Sometimes the hook can be you telling them a story. It could be something that happened on the weekend or some sort of story. You could show them a picture. Read a book about this topic, right? Show them real life items. So if we're going to talk about gardening, maybe I'm going to bring in those materials that we're actually going to use to hook them into what we are about to learn, what we're about to do. The next part of the lesson plan is those procedures. So, what are the steps that you're going to take to complete this activity from beginning to end? Now, this often is not on the lesson plan, especially with that grid, right? Because you are writing step by step exactly what you're going to do, which can be a lot because we do a lot during the day. But think about the procedures in your head. If you're doing maybe working with a small group of children and you want to write it out, cool, not a bad idea. But think about the procedure in your head. How will this lesson unfold from beginning to end? What will be the steps that you're going to take to complete this activity? Picture it in your head, visualize it, doing it with the children, right? Is this something that do you think they'll enjoy it? What are accommodations that you'll have to make for some other children? Think about those procedures inside in your head. Now, yeah, once again, rehearse it or visualize it in your head. And remember to be flexible. We know with little people, sometimes it doesn't always go as planned, and that's okay. Be flexible. And remember that you don't always need to have an end product. So they don't always have to have a craft activity or something tangible, and that's okay as well. Something else to consider is learning styles. So Howard Gardner tells us that people have different learning styles. So you want to think about that as you're planning your lesson. Are you accommodating or speaking to the different learning styles, right? So do you have opportunities for children who are visual learners to be able to see what it is that you're doing. Do you have opportunities for children who are bodily kinesthetic to use their body, to maybe grow as a flower, whatever the case may be? Um, are you those who are have that the music smart? Are you incorporating that into your lesson plan? So it is good to kind of look at this and just to see, are you incorporating different learning styles, right? Sometimes if we are just a visual learners and all of our lessons may be visual, but you may have some children who are nature smart, who needs that exposure. So something else to consider, the different learning styles. And a great thing about these things, you could just look it up, learning styles or Howard Gardner learning styles. You get all kinds of templates and downloads and things that you could do. So there are a lot of resources out there for that. Okay, so we talked about the standards, the objectives, the materials, hooking them in, the procedure from beginning to end. Now we're going to think about the closure, right? It's great to close your activity. So, how are you going to close the lesson? Where will you close the lesson? So, we're talking about gardening and children are gardening or whatever it is that they're doing. How are you going to close this lesson? Will you bring them back to the carpet and have two children share what they did, or bring them back to the carpet and you will just kind of recap what they did? How will you close this lesson that you have just done? Accommodations. So we need to think about those accommodations, right? So you may have children in your class who have a special need, or you may have children in your group that speaks a different language. What are you going to do to accommodate them? Do they need to sit closer to you? Does the time for them have to be shorter for them to complete this activity? Do you have to use a lot of visuals for them to see? How will you accommodate them? So you want to think about that as well. And if you could take a little note on your lesson plan page, great. But think about all the children in your care and how will you accommodate each one or support them so that they can enjoy this fabulous lesson that you're planning. Assessment. Now, how will you know that children have met that objective that you have set in the beginning? So, if you said that children will be able to count to five, how will you know that they can do that, right? Of course, we're not talking about like here's a paper and pencil and fill in a bubble of some sort, but there are some other ways to kind of see how children are growing throughout your program. We have those observations that you can do, and you can take your notes on that. Sometimes demonstrations, maybe if they're playing with their block center, you may ask them those questions and they can demonstrate for you, counting or whatever the case may be. Taking pictures of them working so that you can see, have they been able to apply what you've been working on, what you've been teaching, and just having conversations with them, especially while they're playing. It's a great way to assess. Last part of that lesson plan is extensions or connections. How can you extend this learning activity, right? Or how can you connect it to something new? For example, if we are working on gardening this week and we're talking about gardening, maybe next week if we're going to explore bugs, I could kind of tie that in, right? Now we could talk about bugs that are in our gardens, right? Now children have some background experience with gardens and bugs and so forth. So how can you connect this their old learning to something new, or how can we extend it? How could we extend our numbers or learning our sounds or talking about a certain thing? How could that be extended? All right, so once again, back to the lesson plan. So we have all those thoughts, all those things should go into what you are thinking about when you are planning your lesson. So we have some of those weekly plans. And so some of the things that you definitely want to put on your lesson plan template, of course, is the standard, and you could just write the numbers in. Like I said, you don't have to write the whole thing out unless it's required. You want to definitely have your objective. That really helps to keep you focused so that you know what your outcome is for this activity. What's the purpose of it? That helps you to keep it purposeful. And often we put just a general name of whatever that activity is. All right, just a couple points to remember. Number one, follow the children's interest. They'll let you know what they're interested in, what they're learning. Allow them to follow their interests, explore. If you're working on something and they're taking an interest in the snow that's outside, how could you make that into a teachable moment or a learning opportunity? If they're interested in trucks or dinosaurs, how could you incorporate that? How could you make that into a teaching moment or a learning opportunity? Teachable moment. Be flexible, right? Sometimes things don't always go as planned, and that's okay. So be flexible with your lesson plans. Find ways to make those real world connections. Find ways to bring in real world items for them to explore. Find ways to connect to experiences that they have personally, right? If you're talking about your neighborhood, maybe we're talking about places that we live in. So find ways to connect to those real world experiences. Always try to be prepared, have your materials ready to go, accessible. Try to be purposeful and be intentional about your lessons and your activities. Use your resources. If you need additional activity books or whatever books, Amazon is just a great resource, just so easy. Of course, you have your library and other places like that to get activities and ideas to help. Joining different organizations like NACI or high school, you get sometimes articles and magazines with great ideas, research-based things that you can do to implement in your program. There are a lot of blogs out there with other teachers who are doing activities that you could follow to get great ideas from. And social media is great for that. Of course, you can use all those hashtags to find people who are toddler teachers or pre-K teachers to get ideas from. Brainstorming with other people. If you are owner or director, allowing your teachers to brainstorm together, coming up with a great list of activities that you can do so it's not, you don't feel like you're always trying to reinvent the wheel. Pinterest is also a great source to find activities and such. Now, some common questions that I get. How to plan for a mixed age group. So if you have a mixed age group, the best way to do that is to keep your activities kind of open. For example, going back to the gardening theme again, it's pretty open. Maybe the young children are just, they're digging and they're building their fine motor skills. And the older children may have a task that may be a little bit more challenging with that. Maybe they're actually planting or, something like that. Or you have a whole flower and they're investigating the parts of a flower with their magnifying glass. But the best way is to have learning centers, I think, for them, keep it open, working with small groups. So while your younger children are playing and exploring, maybe you're taking your 4-year-olds to the table to work on a specific activity. And also using the older children to work with the younger ones as well is great. When to plan. So someone asked if they should plan monthly, weekly. I prefer weekly because it's a flexible thing, so things may change. Sometimes if you plan monthly, a lot of people will do their monthly themes and such, like just an overview of what you want to do that month. But then plan weekly, so it's more specific to where they are, what they need, reflecting on what you have done in the previous week and what you need to do for the following week. I had a question about children. A common question is, how do you create lesson plans for children with special needs or engaging lesson plans? One of the best ways is to know what their goals are if they have an IEP or IFSP, knowing what their goals are and creating activities around that. And once again, keeping those things open-ended so that they can participate, and also thinking about what supports do they need, right? So once again, is it depending what it does, they need less time working on an activity? Do they need support? Do they need to buddy up with somebody? Whatever those needs are, find ways to make accommodations to support them in their learning. Now, before I tell you what to do to stay connected, there is a template that you can use. So here you can fill in, I think the boxes are a pretty good size for you to write some things in there. At the bottom, so here you'll add whatever your subjects are or times during the day, whatever you want to add right there. At the bottom, you have your different centers. So if you just want to put the center and what changes you're going to make to your environments for that week, and you could bring that all the way across. You have a space to write some to-do notes so you could prepare, and some materials that you may have to gather. So this is free for you to use. I would love to have your feedback on it to see if this template works for you. Now going back again, just to make sure that we do a quick review, you want to have your standards, objectives, what will children be able to do, all the materials that you're going to need, how are we going to hook them into this lesson, how will the lesson go, what's the procedure, how are you going to wrap it up and close it, what accommodations do you need to make for children inside of your room, and how will you assess that they have met that objective or they are getting close to what you want them to get to. And how can you extend this learning, this lesson, or how can you connect it to new learning? Okay, so I want you to stay connected with me using any of the following. You can visit me on the website at thechildcareceo.com. Join me on Instagram, ChildCareCEO, or join me in our private Facebook group, the Child Care CEO. All right, so it was a pleasure. And if you have any questions or need any clarification or further assistance, please feel free to email me at info@thechildcareceo. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.